And we are live. How you doing, everybody? It's Wardy here, and as you guys can see, we're back at it with our latest Mets news and rumors live show to get into, folks. And we have ourselves a jam-packed one to get into, as I will be shortly accompanied by my good friend and honestly the hottest Mets beat reporter as of late. Seriously, left, right, and center. This guy has been coming out with a lot of big news lately, so we're gonna hear it from the source himself, that being and Pat Ragazzo. We'll be bringing on Pat in the next 10 minutes or so, and Pat's going to break down all the latest news that he has broken himself for this past week, including news that just came out over the past hour or so, reaffirming what we heard from Tim Healy of Newsday over the past couple weeks on the reliever front, along with trade options. The latest on Pete Alonso, our further reactions from the Steve Cohen remarks that were oh so blunt that he said himself. He was brutally honest. I was there in attendance at Amazing Day and was nothing short of an amazing time. Thank you guys so much to everyone that I interacted with. As you guys can see, some awesome photos taken by my good friend there, Chris, who does some amazing Mets photography there for the Mets, for the media, for their players, and everyone else in company. Those are some awesome pics he did of myself, as well as me and my girlfriend. Shout out to him, everybody. Shout out to everyone that, again, attended Amazing Day and are chiming into the live show here tonight, folks, because as I promised you from over this past week, now that we have hit 31,000 subscribers on the platform, every new 1,000 subscribers, we do a giveaway. The same way we did a Juan Soto Mets jersey after hitting 30K, now we're doing a Mets shirt jersey giveaway of whatever player that I can get on the team store for you guys, and whatever size, whatever color you guys want. And all you guys need to do for your chance to now win this Mets shirt jersey is in the next couple minutes, I'm going to tell you guys to start spamming in the live show your name, or just, me, whatever you want in the chat. I'm going to look away and I'm going to count down and then randomly select on a comment. Whoever's comment I land on, you will be the automatic winner of the giveaway. You guys will then reach out to me via email or my DM, and I will get you hooked up with that shirt jersey. I just need you to send me your name, full name, your address, what player you would want that's on the active roster currently, size and color, if I can pick the color from black to blue to white, whatever it may be, guys. So we're going to be doing that in just a second. I see the spam has already begun. I see a lot of my amazing members already in the chat, guys. Thank you so much to everyone chiming in. I greatly appreciate you guys. I don't think I'm going to be able to do a roll call because the chat is absolutely lively at the moment. So I'm going to give you guys another minute or two for everyone to start to circle in. Let this marinate a second, so that way everyone that was planning on attending tonight's live show that's known about it over the past hour, if not over the past couple days. As I told you guys, I was planning on going live this Monday, barring any changes. Thankfully, nothing changed, but I want to give you guys a fair shot, everybody. So everyone first chiming in live on our replay now. If you're wondering what is happening in the live chat, everyone is spamming me, because one of you guys is going to come away with a Mets shirt jersey of whatever player you want on the roster, all just as a simple thank you for helping us hit our latest subscriber milestone of 31,000 here on the platform. Our next milestone will naturally be 32,000, then 33, 34, 35. You get the gist here. And something that we haven't done in previous years is, while we have done a fair share of jersey giveaways and signed autograph jersey giveaways as well, we have done those giveaways kind of, sporadically, whereas I really want to have more of a structure now and a greater incentive. Every 1,000 subscriber goal that we hit on the platform, we're doing some different type of Mets giveaway, and it'll be something of significance that you guys will hopefully want to partake in, like what we're doing right here, right now, everybody. So as I mentioned, we're going to go over all the latest trade options for the Mets, as some potential Pete Alonso replacements we'll highlight from Pat Ragazzo here shortly, as well as what the Mets could consider on the trade front via starting pitchers, if anything. Speaking of starting pitching, we will talk about the rumblings of Max Scherzer, among other guys, Jack Flaherty, Nick Pivetta, to a lesser degree, available in the free agent market. On the reliever market, there's been a lot of talk going on with guys like Tim Hill, among others. David Robertson. Could a reunion be had there? Could a Starling Marte trade still be had? And everything else in between is what we'll get into with my guy Pat Ragazzo here shortly, everybody. Dean, thank you so much for the donation. I will help fund the first shirt jersey. Thank you so much for that, Dean. I greatly appreciate that. If you guys don't know Dean, he has been a tremendous follower here on the platform, and I greatly appreciate his continued generosity and support here. Thank you kindly for that, Dean. It really does mean a lot. God bless you and your family. But all right, guys, we are going to now pick one lucky winner in the chat to win this Mets shirt jersey. So I'm going to count down from 10 now, and once I hit 0, I will randomly look away, click on a comment, and bam, whoever wins, wins. Good luck, everybody. The official randomized Mets shirt jersey giveaway begins now. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All right, guys, it's going to be Roger Pilgrim. Congratulations. You are the winner, my friend, of the Mets shirt jersey giveaway. Because you're being a part of everything media there. So being a part of the scrum with Edwin Diaz, Francisco Alvarez to ask questions, among others, and also Carlos Mendoza. And I had the privilege of asking Carlos Mendoza the following question.
Couple more, guys.
Carlos, what would you say is the advantage of bringing in Desi Driscoll during your time with the Yankees along with Clay Holmes and rekindling that relationship?
Yeah, it's huge that we were able to get Desi. These are guys that will complement with our pitching guys, Jeremy Hefner, Jose Rosado, in a lot of the things that he brings to the table. And then he's very familiar with Clay Holmes, obviously. He knows Frankie Montas, because of his experience with him when Frankie was with the Yankees. But overall, Desi is a sharp guy, very smart, and I'm excited for that.
Yeah, I really want to ask him right away about his connections with Desi and Clay Holmes during his time with the Yankees, because there was an obvious bias and advantage that the Mets had in bringing those guys in-house here, and the comfortability to not only bring in Clay, but to try to transform him back to a starter with Desi Driscoll, who worked one-on-one with him the past couple of years with his pitch shape, among other things there in the Yankees organization. So a great answer there by Carlos, and then the best part of all, as many of you guys know, is that Mendoza actually did recognize me, because right afterwards, when he was done with his media scrum, he came up and gave me a handshake, and with a smirk on his face said, "You're a Wardy," which really had me like in a full tunnel vision moment. It was like a full circle thing. But you guys know those movie scenes, especially like those scary like old school movie scenes where there's someone's standing in like the middle of like a hall, and you get like that tunnel vision where everything kind of backs up, but like you zoom forward at the same time. That's kind of what happened to me there. There's even like a scene in Get Out, I think, that can really depict that pretty well. But that's kind of the moment I had. And it was just a very a feeling that I will never forget, and one I'm forever grateful for. So to Carlos Mendoza and everyone in the Mets organization that have followed my work, who have appreciated it, who have reacted to it, who have maybe been bothered by it as well, regardless of whatever the emotion is, just simply thank you. It really does mean a lot to see just how much outreach we've had since we started the platform all those years ago, now going on 4+ years. We're entering year 5 now, because we're entering year 5 with Steve Cohen. Okay. Pat, do you hear me?
I can hear you, Wardy. Can you hear me, see me?
Yes, we're all good to go. How are you doing tonight, my man? Thank you so much for joining, especially last minute.
Of course. Yeah, no, I'm doing well. What about you?
I'm doing great, man. It was amazing day this past weekend. And, of course, Steve Cohen, in a very Steve Cohen fashion, had the biggest headline of all from a fan fest and his interaction with the fans. And I think that would be a perfect segue to get into, everybody. But folks, before we deep dive it all, in case you guys don't know Pat Ragazzo, Pat, who's been on the platform plenty in the past, has been doing a tremendous job covering the Mets through an affiliate with Sports Illustrated, and has easily been the busiest writer, I feel like, over the past week and a half. You have just been breaking new news left, right, and center. So we're going to certainly deep dive all the latest reporting that you've shared, not only on the reliever market as of today, but the latest on Alonso, piggybacking off of the Amazing Day comments, as well as the trade market with guys like Spencer Torkelson, among others. So, Pat, right away, I just want to know, what was your initial reaction to see Steve Cohen's brutally honest comments there with the fans at FanFest? And secondly, what do you perceive things to be in the current relationship status between Steve Cohen, Pete Alonso, and Scott Boras?
Well, to your last question there, I think the relationship status, if this were being updated on Facebook between the three of them, it would be, or at least the two sides would say, it's complicated.
Right.
And it's indeed complicated. Now, I couldn't make it to FanFest on Saturday. I was out of town this weekend. I clearly missed something pretty big and something we don't often get, and that's the candidness, I should say, we heard from Steve Cohen to the fans. I think it's pretty clear that Steve Cohen and the Mets are exhausted. and they're tired of just the way negotiations have gone and how they really haven't progressed and really have been wheels have been spinning in the mud there, to say the least. But Steve Cohen went out and signed Juan Soto to basically $800 million contract, swiped him away from the Yankees, who won a pennant with him in his lone season there. All the tradition, everything else, little brother narrative, and just the New York Yankees being a global brand. We've never seen the Mets steal a player of that magnitude away from the Yankees. It just has never, ever happened in our lifetime. And Steve Cohen did all this, and now all he hears about is Pete Alonso. So I think he's probably a little irritated by it, and you can kind of tell when you could hear it in his voice when he was talking to the fans and addressing them, especially that the Mets fans were booing David Stearns, blaming it all on him. That's been the narrative as well. And Steve Cohen stepped to the plate for him, said, "Hey, I'm involved too, and we've really tried 2 times at least, maybe more, and we put our best foot forward, and sometimes it's not good enough, and you guys are just gonna have to take it as it is, and accept the reality that Alonso might not be coming back." And that's really looks like it's going to be the reality right now, if it weren't for the fact that Alonso has really literally no market. So the Mets aren't going to bid against themselves. And to my point about booing Stearns, I mean, his first year as president of baseball operations, where the Mets thought that this was going to be a transition year, he brought them to the first NLCS, 2 wins shy of the World Series for the first time in 9 years. Like, the fans are getting spoiled, I think. Like, they're not just happy, and they don't trust the process. One of the best young, brightest executives in the game of baseball, and one of the best owners in professional sports and richest owners of professional sports. Steve Cohen's putting his foot down. Even the multi-billionaire clearly has his limits. And he's not just going to spoil his children, meaning the Mets fans, just because he has the money to. He's a businessman first and foremost, and that's how he got to this point. He's not just going to make a bad business deal where the bottom line is that he said it himself. It's asymmetric in swinging towards the pendulum of benefiting Pete Alonso and Scott Boras and not benefiting the Mets.
Yeah, and I think a big standout for me right away was how eerily similar his remarks are to what we've heard relayed through the media. Like, let's be frank, what we have heard since, especially when Andy Martino of SNY, among yourself and others, have really reiterated how the Mets are now pivoting and how the door is not completely closed, but they're not at all satisfied with how the negotiations have been. They've had a hard line in the sand on not even wanting to go beyond the 3 years of $70 million. With deferred money, I'd imagine maybe you're pushing north of the $80+ million range. Otherwise, I'm not sure why you're deferring just a couple million per se. But going with that belief and understanding, maybe there's still a $10 to $15 million off on a gap for the Mets to be this stubborn on something like that tells you that they're certainly not comfortable with just the figures and certainly the structures that are continuously thrown by Scott Boras and Pete Alonso. And you know that certainly Scott Boras is going to do everything right away to have his reaction and save face, because this is a further public negotiation. And Pat, as we were just talking off air seconds ago on pretty much how this works through the media, how we kind of see these public negotiations before our very eyes, we've now reached unprecedented territory where the owner of the Mets especially is pretty much saying verbatim, I hate these negotiations. I can't stand them. The figures are asymmetrical, as we allude to. And for Scott Boras to, basically clap back the same day and allude to along the lines of how we have been consistent in our proposals, that makes sense, us and the value of Alonso, among other things, it is truly a unprecedented time that we have in this entire baseball coverage when it comes to Steve Cohen. And the reality that is Pete Alonso, as much as he still could return the Mets, it's going to take, I think, a little bit of patchwork on both sides. And it's going to take, whether it's some humbling to Pete Alonso and his camp for maybe going a little overboard on what they think the value is versus what the market is telling them what it is. Or it could be one of those things where maybe the Mets feel comfortable now without him, but maybe as time goes on, they are not so comfortable with their backup options, with their pivot options, and they show a little bit of a further willingness to circle more back in Alonso's market. It's going to be a fascinating one, but do you have any final closing remarks on really how this saga has been at this point?
It's going to take a lot of pride swallowing for this to happen, for Alonso to come back to the Mets. The door's closed. The Mets have moved on. They pivoted. They're making other moves. They could continue to make other moves, whether that's a reliever they're looking for. You kind of alluded to it. I reported tonight before I hopped on here that Mets, Yankees, Dodgers, Diamondbacks, Rockies, Angels are among the teams in on Tim Hill. And there's a mutual interest with Hill and the Yankees on a reunion, but the Mets are in there too. It's a possibility. And
Right.
the Mets are the more moves they make, the less likely it is for Pete Alonso to come back. And the most smoke and the favorite seemed like the Blue Jays at the end of last week. I also reported on Friday that Alonso met with the Angels on Thursday. My take, my gut, and this is speculation, if Pete Alonso had the offer he wanted, he would probably sign with that team. I think Pete Alonso still does want to stay with the Mets. The Mets have made it clear they want him back. Steve Cohen even said, never say never. But the reality is we've moved on.
Right.
If Pete Alonso re-engages and the Mets re-engage, which it's possible, we haven't heard anything. I have not heard anything either. Otherwise, I would have reported it. But I do believe that until Alonso signs with another team, it's not 100% done that he's not coming back to the Mets, but it is ugly. It's gotten ugly. And like, it's going to be a lot of buzz, a big distraction if he comes back to the Mets. Like, that's the situation. Like, it's gotten ugly. It's a separation right now. They're separated and the things are getting hostile publicly. And we're going to find out if they're actually going to get divorced or if they're going to wind up kissing and making up and getting back together. I just don't know. But Alonso's the best fit for the Mets and vice versa. Like, Pete Alonso, if he goes to the Blue Jays, hey, I think the Blue Jays are serious about getting him. The Blue Jays baseball leadership group, they're all on the hot seat. Mark Shapiro's going into the last year of his deal. Ross Atkins' seat is on fire. Like, the Blue Jays have a weak American League. There's no reason they can't win a wild card. They just got Anthony Santander. If they sign Alonso, say they bring in a Max Scherzer, like, even if maybe they bring in Bregman, like, bringing in Alonso, and it doesn't seem like they're going to trade Vlad. Like, that seems out of the question at this point. Guys are trying to save their jobs, and they do so by winning a wild card when that's very attainable in the AL. So even if they don't extend Vladdy by his self-imposed deadline of February 17th, like, they're still inclined to keep him. They're still inclined to keep him if they sign Alonso. And it's just the question, like, Pete wants to be in New York. Does he want to go to Toronto? I mean, the one thing to think about there, and this is why I don't think there's any way he goes to the Angels unless they throw an absolute monster deal at him, that I think that just probably was just like kind of continuing to keep his options open and build out his market a little more by meeting with the Angels on Thursday. So I think that with the Blue Jays, he would still be able to live in Tampa and do Florida spring training. And the Blue Jays spring training facility is right by Tampa. It's in Dunedin, Florida.
Right.
So Alonso wouldn't have to uproot his life just in baseball season, would have to live in Toronto, but he still would live in Florida most of the year, which is where he's from. So that's why I see, like, it kind of does make sense. And Vladdy would play third, which he's been training at third all offseason, I've been told. So that's not dependent on Alonso. Vladdy wants to play third, and he's training at the position, and he's played there before. So if Alonso goes to the Blue Jays, Vladdy will play third, and he'll probably DH, and Alonso might DH a little bit, but he'll play first. He'll probably be mostly the first baseman, and it makes sense. But again, if Alonso had a knock your socks off offer that he was willing to accept right now with the Blue Jays, I think he would have. And if they're close, if talks were really advancing and getting hot, like we heard, I heard differently in the end of the week. I heard that the Blue Jays were close on nothing as of Thursday afternoon. If talks continue to advance or advance from where they were, then we should know as the days progress, maybe by the end of the week, where Pete Alonso is going. But again, I think that he really, really wants to give the Mets a chance, is my gut telling me that he's not ready to finalize the divorce. If there's any type of crack, the door's unlocked, whatever it may be. If there is some avenue they could figure out and kind of make up, maybe, because I don't doubt that there's hard feelings, especially from Alonso's side. He's done a lot for the franchise. I think his side feels disrespected, and the Mets don't want to be taken advantage of either in the same breath. So again, I think if there's any wiggle room, any avenue for Pete Alonso to return to the Mets, I think that he's going to explore it. That's why we haven't seen a resolution here. And then, the bottom line is he clearly doesn't have the offers that he's looking for yet. So he's willing to wait a little longer. But if those offers exist right now, then we probably will see it happen in the next couple of days if the Mets and Alonso can't come up with a solution here and just say, hey, look, we're both exhausted. We're not going to come to terms. We're too far apart. Like, let's just walk away now and no hard feelings from here. Like that's probably that's a possibility of happening, obviously.
Yeah, it feels like there's two major things that stick out on the Alonso front right now. It's A, given how messy this has gone in the public eye, should Alonso return on, say, a hypothetical 3-year structure contract with that first-year opt-out still, but just maybe higher AAV that's more to the liking of Alonso and the Mets are willing to stomach because maybe there aren't that rumored those further dollars if, say, if he does opt out among other things. But even with that being the case, I initially looked at that and said, okay, the cloud wouldn't be looming over his head the way he did this past year, because while, yes, he is still a Scott Boras client and he could enter a walk year, it's a matter of he could, and it's not a guarantee if it would be on the player option side of things. But given how messy this has been aired out in the public eye, I know that Alonso has dealt with the media, good, bad, and different, over his past number of years here in Queens, but I wonder to what degree does he potentially feel slighted, among other things, in a situation like this. And then secondly, I also look at from the Alonso point of view of, if he's going to sign somewhere else, my common thought has been, what makes more sense for him to go elsewhere where he will then have more of a guarantee? I need to bank on myself and hope to opt out a year from now to hit the free agent market because I'm with a new team, and maybe this is not the team that I want to be with long term, but it's the team I have to settle with right now. First time I'm part of that clubhouse, and maybe you don't sign until we already start spring training or close to. We've seen the potential negative impact it's had on players, especially trying to go right back out in the free agent market, like Jordan Montgomery, Blake Snell, at least in the early goings before Snell showed why he's one of the best in the game still. Matt Chapman had his ups and downs. He had a slow start initially when he got started in San Fran. So I'm really curious, what's your final thoughts on that in particular with those 2 points on the Alonso negotiation front?
Well, you just mentioned it with Chapman and Blake Snell and Scott Boras. These are Scott Boras clients. Like Chapman and Snell, like they took the short-term deals thinking they overplayed their market in their hand. They took the short-term deals and then they cashed in on long-term deals the next year. Like Alonso could do that. And Snell was 33 doing it this offseason. And I know he won 2 Cy Youngs. Like Chapman has never been much of a hitter. Like he's a great fielder and he got a big deal. Like Alonso is a much better player than Chapman. I guess that's his argument. But in terms of the athleticism, his defense, like everything else, like it's just not. We saw it in the 2010s with Albert Pujols and Prince Fielder and Miguel Cabrera. Like it's they don't age well. Those are all-time greats. Those are Hall of Famers. Like they don't age well. The long-term first baseman, they don't. They break down. Like that's what's most likely going to happen with Alonso. Like he's going to be a DH in a couple of years and for the long term. And the Mets talking about feeling slighted. Like, yeah, I think Alonso has hard feelings, but the Mets offered him 7 years, $158 million extension 2 years ago, and he turned it down.
Right.
They offered him 3 years north of $70 million with opt-outs. He turned it down. So I don't know what else he wants because like, I don't, that's exactly the point. Actually, I don't know what he wants and I don't think anyone does. And it's really like, I think he wants to be with the Mets, but he doesn't know what he wants for 2025. He knows he wants a long-term deal. He's not going to get a long-term deal right now. But again, look at Chapman, look at Snell. Like if Alonso didn't have a good year for his career last year. He had a good postseason. And honestly, like if he didn't have a good postseason, if he didn't come up clutch and biggest home run of his career to save their season in game 3 of the wild card, like the Mets fans wouldn't even be complaining about him.
No, this is a much different discussion. If Alonso struck out against Devin Williams and then the Mets went on to be bounced in that wild card, I 100% agree.
And if Alonso hit all year or part of the year in the clutch, like with runners in scoring position, the way he did in the postseason, he had a great postseason, no credit taken away from him. If he hit like that in the regular season, the Mets would have had some more wins and they wouldn't have been playing for the final wild card spot on the last day of the season and had that extended day. Like he didn't have a good year to his standards. He averages like 40 home runs for his career. He's put up some great years, but the last 2 years haven't been great. 2023 either. He batted .217. His slugging percentage has gone down every year. His on-base percentage has gone down. He wasn't that great on defense to begin with. He's not a liability. Like he's gotten better at picking the ball. Like he definitely can field the position, but he just, for so many reasons, like teams, and I talked to rival scouts about this in June and did a story on it where they were saying the Mets should move on from him, not only trade him, because at that point the Mets weren't back in contention yet. This was in early June, and move on from him in the offseason. And I know that that's a sensitive topic and it's a tough pill to swallow, but in terms of long-term moves, and David Stearns is a long-term guy, that's why they brought him in here. He's here for the long haul. it's not a good long-term move to keep him. If it wasn't for how much he meant for the franchise, they probably wouldn't even be talking about keeping him long-term. But I wrote this yesterday in a pretty long column for Mets on SI, where I said he should look at what Yoenis Cespedes did. They were the same age, 30 years old. Cespedes carried the Mets to the World Series and was a better player at the time, more impactful player. The Mets got him. He uplifted an anemic lineup.
Oh, I know. My fandom really rooted from that year, especially.
Yeah, and he made them world beaters, and he was elite. And Cespedes he probably was the best left fielder in baseball at the time, and he took a 3-year, $75 million deal with opt-outs. He had another big year, although he did spend time on the injury list, I believe with a hamstring injury, if I'm remembering correctly. In 2016, he still put up 31 home runs, 86 RBIs, came back out in free agency, 31 years old, and got a 4-year, $110 million deal to stay with the Mets. And he meant less to that franchise. Well, I mean, he did help them to a World Series, but he meant less in the franchise than what Pete's done. And it's a possibility with Pete. So again, we've exhausted talking about it in the media. Like that's all we've been talking about since the Mets signed Soto. But I will say that there's at least one external move that I've heard they're considering, which I reported Friday, and makes sense to me. Otherwise, they probably should just go with what they have internally. But Spencer Torkelson makes sense, and that's something they're considering if Alonso leaves. Now, I don't know this for sure, but my sense and my gut is telling me that Torkelson could be a move to keep an eye on if and when Pete signs with another team. That could be something the Mets pivot to pretty quickly.
Yeah, I feel like the quickness is something, and again, we were talking off air about this on just how rapidly things can change, especially as soon as new news starts to come out, and then bam, we find out that, okay, this team has interest in the player, and then bam, this team does, and okay, this team signs him in the span of like, just say 6, 12, 24 hours after the initial reportings that the markets are starting to heat up. Torkelson's a very fascinating one to me that I want to have a little bit of not too long of a discussion on, but definitely want to know your continued thoughts on. But before we get to Spencer, we'll talk on Tim Hill as well as you reaffirm what we know on Tim Helium. Newsday initially reported a couple weeks ago, so I want to see what the difference in the market for Hill has been since then, where the Mets stand, and certainly rekindling that relationship with Desi Druskel. I see that upside right away. But we have Camp in the chat real quick with a $2 donation that says Alonso with a 3-year contract, opt out first year, and then opt-out first-year salary penalty. There would be no penalty, obviously, when it comes to a deal and any type of structure, but I do think a 3-year deal with an opt-out, if not 2, does make sense, and I think we're going to get there. It's really hard to grasp that they could be at, like, just say a $15 to $20 million gap, when I know that's a lot of money, but that still isn't in the grand scheme of things for how a lot of these negotiations have went, but certainly the Mets have had that kind of line in the sand with the luxury tax to a degree. You know, they still want to make sure that they're not going too overboard, even with all the money that's come off the books this year. Is there anything that you could further add on to with that before we talk about Spencer?
The Mets have tried. I mean, they offered 3 years with opt-outs around $75 million. Like, I don't know the nitty gritty. I don't know what the holdup is. If it's deferred money, if it's buyouts in attached to the opt-outs, like, I just don't know. There's something that we're not being told. Steve Cohen kind of alluded to whatever it is doesn't benefit us. And Scott Boras then released a statement through The Athletic, I believe, to Will Salmon, that it's standard practice what they're offering, and it's happened before with, you know, all-star clients. Like, I don't know. It's just a war of words. And he said, she said, like, we don't know. But if it was as simple as that, as just the 3-year deal, 70-something million and opt-outs, hey, the Mets offered that. So, and he rejected it. So again, it's clearly not so linear as people might think. And I think most people don't think that. Otherwise we would have seen Alonso come back to the Mets.
When we've heard this constant reiteration from people in the media over the past couple weeks saying how by the Mets pivoting, this allows them to, say, shop for the bigger fish in the free agent market, especially relievers, or to potentially still go out and get a bat of significance among the limited options that are out there. I know the Mets initially had interest in Jurickson Profar before the Atlanta Braves pounced and signed him to $42 million, $14 million AAV across 3 years. But especially on the front on how willing the Mets are in their spending, is this really a circumstance where you would say if the Mets bring in Alonso that will strap them on spending really really anything of significance in the pen where they may defer to more so on those guys on those $1, $2, $3 million deals, where a Ryan Stanek reunion, for example, could be had if he's willing to take a little bit of a discount among others. Not that I think they'd bring back Phil Maton, but in similarity to Adam Ottavino from last offseason, where initially didn't bring them back on the initial contract proposal that they could have because of the team option, play option, what have you, but they bring them back on lesser value of someone of similar profile. How truthful would you say it is that, based on what happens with Alonso, directly goes in hand with the Mets' willingness or lack thereof to spend for the bullpen and other aspects of the pitching?
I don't think it really affects it because they're not, unless they make a trade for a big starter, which I don't know that they're going to do. I don't think they're going to give up assets for a rental starter. I talked about it today. Like, the price for Dylan Cease is very high, so I don't see the Mets going there. Michael King, I think, would be a great fit, but again, like, I think the Padres are still going to ask for too much than David Stearns and the Mets are willing to do for another rental. So I don't believe that it'll cost that much to bring in a veteran reliever on a one-year deal, whether that's Tim Hill, whether it's bringing back Ryan Stanek, whether it's even bringing back Maton, which I don't think they're going to. Like, they already declined his option. They weren't going to give him $7.75 million. Like, maybe they bring him back cheaper, but I don't know. I think that there's better options out there. Maton was good for them after they acquired him in the regular season. He was overused, and by the bullpen, he was, by the postseason, I should say, he was burnt out, and he was not a reliable arm in the bullpen. So, no, I don't think them signing Alonso really bleeds into them not being able to sign a reliever, even if they are operating with a budget this year, which has kind of been a rumor that's been floating out there recently. I don't think that one affects the other. I really don't.
Yeah, and that was the main thing that I had question-wise, because it's hard to envision the Mets, even with the amount of losses that they had, because I know that the Mets were reportedly the team that lost the most money this past year. I believe is at least like $250+ million. The next closest team was right in around $100 million range or so. So even with all the losses that they suffered this past year, I know that they had a lot coming off the books in general, just on payroll alone, which is why there was a lot of this flexibility where, in theory, they can comfortably sign Juan Soto to what they did, $51 million AAV for the next number of years, bring back Pete Alonso, bring in some quality starters, potentially bring in another bat, because they did try for Jock Peterson. They just didn't like Jock at $17+ million AAV across multiple years. And then Teoscar Hernandez, they were more willing on the AAV, but when Teo's offered one more additional year and deferred payment from the team he just won the World Series with, it's hard to say no if you're in his shoes. So that's really led us to the point of, it kind of feels like Alonso or bust, in the sense of the Mets adding a bat of significance in this market. But if it isn't going to be Pete Alonso, let's talk about now the potential of Spencer Torkelson. Because one, I want to know, what was your initial reaction to hearing this news through your respective sources? And secondly, how feasible do you think a guy like Spencer Torkelson could be as a younger, potentially, I don't want to say higher upside fit than Alonso, because it's hard to envision him having a greater peak than what Alonso's had in his career at this point, but at least higher upside versus what Torkelson has given us at the MLB level to this point?
He's not a higher upside than Alonso, but he's a higher upside than Brett Beatty at this point, and they're two very similar profiles. Former top prospects, former top picks, same age, 25 years old, and both could use a change of scenery. And honestly, Torkelson has had big league success. 2023, he hit 31 home runs, drove in 94 RBIs, like had a 759 OPS. Beatty hasn't come close to any of those numbers in the bigs, and has got sent down both years. He was given an opportunity to be a starter. So, and Vientos overtook him at third base. So I think that, again, when I heard this of Torkelson, I began to dig into it and wound up reporting it with the information that I got further after getting the initial tip, because it makes sense to me that they would trade for Torkelson. I heard that the Tigers might be looking for maybe a couple top prospects in the top 15. I don't think they're going to get that. I don't think the Mets are going to give up that. I think that a Beatty for Torkelson swap straight up would benefit both sides potentially and benefit both players. So I heard things from everything from Torkelson has a hitch in his swing to he goes the other way too much. And with paired with Jeremy Barnes and Eric Chavez, like Barnes specifically would get Torkelson to pull more. So it's a good fit. And I've also heard whispers that David Stearns wants to keep Vientos at third base. And you have to also think that Vientos, if he goes to first base and spends a lot of time having to learn how to pick it. I mean, Lindor's a great defensive shortstop, but he likes to bounce the ball. And that's something Alonso's improved on, but something Vientos is going to have to work on. He's going to have to really focus on that position, and it could affect his offense, and we could see a sophomore slump if that happens. I mean, a different example from a couple of years ago was when the Yankees stuck Gleyber Torres at shortstop, and he was a nightmare, and it affected his offense. So I don't think that the Mets really should risk that. I think it's definitely something they're open to, is having him play first base. But and I think if they go internally and don't add another infielder, don't bring back Alonso, don't bring in Torkelson, don't make any moves, then Vientos makes sense at first base, and then maybe Acuna or Mauricio or Beatty at third, or Acuna at second and McNeil at third, Acuna at second and Mauricio at third. And McNeil might play a lot of left field with Nimmo still dealing with the foot injury with the plantar fasciitis. So there's a number of different things on the table, a number of different avenues they can go. And I know everyone's excited about Acuna, and he deserves a lot of props for what he was able to do in the biggest moment on the biggest stage, and really is a big reason the Mets made the playoffs last year when he filled in for Lindor in September. It was very impressive after a rough year in Syracuse where no one thought he was ready for the bigs. But at the same time, like, he still needs to show something in spring training. Like, he needs to have good spring training and win that job. And I think he's a better fit at second base. I know Mendoza said that I've heard this, and then Mendoza said it Saturday that Acuna is taking ground balls at third base, but like, he doesn't profile as a third baseman, like, just because of his size. Like, I think he's a smooth fielder. I think he could do it, but he's not the right build and size to play third base. So I think second base makes sense for him, and McNeil can play a bunch of different positions. Now, McNeil, it remains to be seen whether he's willing to and whether he can play third base, because he had troubles there in 2019 and 2020.
Yeah, he has not looked great every time he's been at the corner so far.
Right. I think left field and second base probably make the most sense for McNeil, especially with Nimmo. You're going to want to play it safe with him in the early part of the year, and either if they have to start him on the IL or if he has to DH some days or a lot of days. I mean, moving Marte would open up more DH at bats for Nimmo, but they need to be cautious with him. And as a result, McNeil, Winker, and maybe even Marte could be playing a lot of left field to start the year.
Before we get into Marte, because I want to pivot to him here shortly, and then we'll wrap by talking more on both the starter and reliever front not too long after that. But to just peel back for a second on Spencer Torkelson and really this fit as well. You mentioned the success that he had in 2023. A couple things really stand out to me there that I'm sure you know as well. One, the Detroit Tigers had a very anemic offense in 2023. It's not like they were on their wild card run in the second half that they did here in 2024, in which Torkelson was a part of that and certainly made great adjustments after he was sent down to AAA around mid-June in 2024. Because for people that are unaware, Spencer Torkelson, who had a tremendous sophomore year in the major leagues, and for context, at that age, Pete Alonso was still in the minor leagues. So Spencer Torkelson's 2024 season would have been the equivalent of Pete Alonso's rookie year based on age alone. This is a former top pick we're talking about who hit the major leagues at a much quicker level with a absolutely anemic Detroit Tigers offense until really what we saw this past season. So when he had no protection around him, he had an over 30 home run, over 90 RBI season. Yes, he has a bit of a loopy swing at times. Yes, he can certainly strike out at a good rate, but there's still a lot of upside for someone who's still at the young age of 25. 4 years of control, who can work both on his offensive and his defensive game, work on his contact ability, having a better eye at the plate for sure. But he looked fantastic in 2023. And then as we entered 2024, Pat, we saw him have a really poor start to spring training, which went in hand with actually a thumb injury that he renagged from, I believe, breaking it on a mug or something in 2021. So it was one of these bizarre things that came back to kind of bite him a couple years later now, and that led to a very slow start in 2024, ultimately leading to his demotion around mid-June. Down there for a month and a half, he hits 11 home runs in 50 games or so. He comes back up, and he certainly worked on his mechanics better and helped the Tigers to their playoff run into the wild card in 2024. Do you think that Torkelson is a very realistic option for the Mets? And as you alluded to, one that maybe they could get done relatively quickly given the lack of demand for someone like him, and also just kind of the universal lack of demand for a first baseman across Major League Baseball right now. The Mets are kind of just one of a few teams, it feels like, that's really in a loop for having a clear question mark at that position heading into the season.
Well, one thing, Colt Keith is the first baseman for the Tigers.
Right.
That happened after they added Gleyber Torres, who we mentioned earlier. Like there's no room. Torkelson's been displaced. The Tigers could use a third baseman. That's why they've been linked to Alex Bregman so many times this offseason. I don't think they're going to spend on Alex Bregman. So what they can do, they can move Torkelson for Beatty and hope for, for Beatty to unlock his potential. And I think that he would in Detroit. I still think Brett Beatty is going to turn out to be a pretty good big leaguer, but I just don't know that it's going to happen with the Mets. Agreed. And neither do they, clearly. They're still high on him, but at the same time, you only get so many chances, and he's running out of them. And still just 25 years old, as is Torkelson. But again, they brought in Glaber. They made their decision. They moved Colt Keith to first. That's it for Torkelson. Like, they should move him. They should do what's best for the player and the organization. And I think a Beatty for Torkelson swap would make a lot of sense. And with Torkelson, do I think it's realistic? Yes. Do I think it's going to happen before Alonso makes his decision? No. Because right. if they traded for Torkelson, then that's it. Then the door's closed on Alonso.
It would be like going for Matt Olson first before Freddie Freeman made his decision with the and that's where it really gets as sour as it could possibly get.
I'm glad you brought that up because, hey, the Braves fans couldn't see Freddie Freeman leaving. He helped them win a World Series a couple months before. It happened. He left and he went to the Dodgers. It can happen. The Mets fans need to just realize this is a business. It's not all on feelings and emotions. I know everyone can't grasp that because that's what a lot of this game, at least from a fandom standpoint, is based off of. And Steve Cohen's a Mets fan himself. But again, like I said earlier, he's a businessman first and foremost. He didn't get to this point and to be worth $22 billion by making bad business deals, clearly. So, maybe, Alonso gets a little bit, should get a little bit of, a little extra maybe because of what he's meant to the franchise and even with one more year, he's most likely going to be the all-time leader in home runs for the Mets. And he's only 27 home runs away from standing alone in that spot. But again, it's a business and it happened with Freeman a couple years ago. So just, again, that's the reality of the situation in this business.
Appreciate that breakdown, Pat. And before we pivot on to some of our final topics, thank you guys so much for smashing that like and subscribe button as we're breaking down the latest Mets land. For those that don't know, this is my guy Pat Ragazzo, and he has been doing a tremendous job covering the Mets. They're an affiliate with Sports Illustrated the past number of years, and he's been a very busy man the past week and a half, not only breaking down the latest on the Pete Alonso front, but Spencer Torkelson that we just alluded to, that he was the first to break on the connection. The Mets are considering a potential pivot there should Alonso go elsewhere, younger, and certainly has high upside to a degree with Torkelson. And I will even say this, when I look at the 1-for-1 proposal on him for Beatty, if I'm Detroit, I probably want a little bit more there just because I think Torkelson gave you more and what was a lot more impressive in a 162 campaign in his sophomore year than Beatty's given us truly at any sample size over, his spurts of having 40, 50 games the past couple of years, because Beatty's first year and kind of gained a decent sample size, both the offense and the defense labored. We saw last year the defense was proficient. It looked fantastic in the hot quarter. That was really not a liability outside of one or two bad games where Beatty just stuck out and just for whatever reason had a blunder. Otherwise, he was fine. He had the spurts of the home run heroics, including some ones against the Colorado Rockies, but really very few and far in between, and he went back to being that ground ball hitter that's really been his demise so far in his young career. So I think Beatty, as you alluded to, definitely will benefit from a change of scenery should he be dealt, just because I don't see how he blossoms unless he surprises many fans this year the way that Vientos surprised many last year. If Mark does in fact get shifted to first base and handles it completely fine, and the Mets stay in-house with Beatty, and we have the fans kind of conflicted with having Soto but not doing anything else of significance on the offensive front behind outside of, reunions with Winker, maybe Iglesias, among others. But we could find ourselves in similarity where, again, the Mets player development is going to need to step up here and showcase why staying in-house would be the best pivot if it's going to be that way. But if the Mets are going to be staying in-house for things, there's also potential that there are going to be guys coming out. And one of those could be Starling Marte that you alluded to going back to the winter meetings, how the Kansas City Royals and the Mets were in active trade negotiation for a controllable and honestly a Ryan Stanek-esque reliever, not only on the looks to a degree, but on their high velocity as right-handers, and that being in Hunter Harvey. Have you heard anything else on the Starling Marte Marte market since then. And what do you say that's almost more of a likelihood of Marte not going anywhere now, given the lack of availability now in the free agent market? Jerks and Profar felt like that final piece that I thought would have made sense to validate trading Marte to bring in Profar as essentially his replacement, an upgraded version there. But as we heard from Carlos Mendoza himself there, as I was part of the media scrum on Saturday, he said it himself that it's going to be Winker and Marte platooning at the DH spot for now. What would you say on the latest with Starling?
Well, I think Marte's there to hit. I like the idea of having him platoon as a DH with Jesse Winker. And again, like I said, those guys will probably be playing left field with Nimmo, dealing with the plantar fasciitis. That's just the reality of the situation. It's more so the reason to keep them. Unless Pete Alonso comes here, then it doesn't. I think the more Alonso's decision, I think, will also affect it again, because Marte's not as expendable offensively if they don't bring back Alonso. So, his trade market was hot. They tried to move him in December during the winter meetings. This was like the first or second week of December that they were talking to the Royals about Hunter Harvey. I've heard nothing since, other than that obviously that trade didn't come to fruition. So that's not there anymore. And I think they're more likely to, as we continue to get closer to spring training, unless an opportunity arises, obviously, then it's more likely than not that Marte will wind up staying with the Mets, because right now there seems to be no traction on the trade front for Marte at the moment.
Final, not random question, but not in line with the topics that we talked about at this point. What do you have to say on the Mets pretty much being out on the Alex Bregman market, at least reportedly what we heard from Ari Alexander, more so out of Houston's camp over this past day, with the Red Sox, the Detroit Tigers, and the Chicago Cubs being the bigger suitors there, and the Mets' previous interest in Willy Adames, with those rumblings floating that the Mets could consider someone like him at the hot corner if the right opportunity presented itself. I'd imagine more short-term, higher AV, maybe with opt-outs. Are the Mets still opportunistic on the front of trying to upgrade third base defensively, specifically, i.e., say a Nolan Arenado potentially, who I know has the Mets on his short-lived list of trade suitors that he would consider going to? I'm just curious as to, we know David Stearns has an emphasis with really building good team defense. And we know while Vientos was not much of a liability throughout the regular season, his defense, or lack thereof, upside certainly stood out on the playoff front in some key moments for the Mets against both the Phillies and the Dodgers. So what's your thoughts on really David Stearns' viewpoint at the hot corner and how much defense matters?
I think David Stearns in a perfect world would want to keep Vientos there and let him continue to develop. That might not happen if they don't add another first baseman or bring back Alonso. So I don't think that's as likely. I mean, it's too complicated to trade for an Arenado who's a declining player in his mid-30s who is making a lot of money, and they would have to give up assets. That doesn't make sense. I know that he would waive his trade clause for the Mets, but it doesn't. I really do not see that. And I mean, they were engaged with Bregman. I don't think anything got serious, because Bregman's clearly looking for something north of what Matt Chapman got, and the Mets aren't going to give that to Bregman. They'll be opportunistic in terms of if Bregman's willing to take a short-term deal with opt-outs or something like that, but I don't know that he is. I know we just heard it come out in the past few days that the Houston Astros have left the door cracked for bringing Bregman back, and they have a 6-year, $156 million deal that I believe is still on the table for him. And I can tell you right now, the Mets aren't going to give him that money.
Nowhere close.
I just don't think that they're going to bring in, unless they make a trade. Maybe there's a Torkelson type third baseman type who we're not thinking about, maybe. But I more so see them bringing in a first baseman over a third baseman right now.
Okay. Noted. Yeah, especially on the Bregman front. I know that they've been dead for a while, and anything can change, especially if we do find ourselves deeper into spring training and he's another Scott Boras client that just doesn't have the deal he wants yet. Maybe things go sour with the Astros. I think he's going to go back to Houston. Initially, before the offseason began, I told myself right away I can't see Alex Bregman not in an Astros uniform. Similarly to Alonso with the Mets, it just doesn't feel like it would make sense. The Red Sox with Bregman, I think, makes sense to a degree, but more so on if you were to sign a short-term high EV deal with opt-outs. That way he could be out of batter's box for at least half the season, kind of, where he had some upside there at Minute Maid Park there with the Houston Astros. So now, folks, going from talking about Alex Bregman and the offensive standpoint, let's wrap things up by getting into the pitching, and let's get into your report that you alluded to earlier today, having everything to do with Tim Hill, because I know the Mets lefty options currently are one of the best high leverage guys in the game, and AJ Minter, which is fantastic for them. Actually, a lefty that knows velocity with his fastball. The Mets haven't had that in recent years, really, outside of, some success certainly with Brooks Raley, but not known for being, much of a heavy thrower there with the velo. Now, when you look at having AJ Minter as your high leverage lefty option, there's still room for at least one more guy there. And while Danny Young was certainly doing his best to represent at Amazing Day among many other Mets there, I think the Mets would still like to have an upgrade. And whether that is to see Genesis Cabrera break things greatly out of camp who has velocity too, or to go for more of a soft tossing option who had a lot of success last season in Tim Hill. What do you have to say about Hill, the Mets' interest among other teams, and the Mets really still nipping at the heels for another reliever or two this offseason?
The Mets are looking for another reliever. Tim Hill fits that criteria even after they got Minter. I don't know that the Mets have a preference for bringing another righty or lefty. I guess it would make sense for a righty, but would have to look at Tim Hill's splits against righties and lefties. But yes, Tim Hill makes sense for them. They're in the mix. They've been interested for a number of weeks. Like they remain in contact. Like it's a possibility. And Desi Driscoll, who again, as we talked about earlier in the show, he had a hand in the reclamation of Tim Hill last year when he arrived in the Bronx. So it makes a ton of sense. And the Mets essentially replaced Ryan Stanek with AJ Minter, and now they should replace Phil Maton with a Tim Hill or someone like that. So yeah, I think that Tim Hill also is enticing to a lot of teams because he did it on the highest, biggest of stages and the high leverage moments last year. And he didn't just have a 2.05 ERA with the Yankees in 44 innings the rest of the regular season after he got dumped by the lowly White Sox. He also put up a 1.08 ERA in the postseason, and fans were screaming and banging on the table about why Aaron Boone wouldn't go to him to face Ohtani and face the lefties and Freeman in the 10th inning of Game 1 of the World Series, and they got burned for it, obviously, when Nestor Cortez gave up the walk-off grand slam to Freeman. So that's really of how much Tim Hill's star rose last year after an ugly start with the White Sox. He really emerged into a breakout reliever. I know he's had success in the past with other teams such as San Diego, but he really broke out on the biggest of stage and caught a lot of eyes, and that's why his market is pretty robust right now as the relief market continues to heat up over the next few weeks.
Yeah, Tim Hill's market has been fascinating because I remember him during his time with the San Diego Padres, and he had a level of success there too. He's been all over the place. Another one of these veteran lefties that, has continued to put up some respectable numbers. And I know that with a guy like Hill seeing the success today, not so much had with Chicago, but had a lot more there with the Yankees. To do that at the big stage, as you alluded to, something that certainly stands out for David Stearns. He said he loves bringing in guys that have the New York experience, big market experience, and in big game situations. Check. Those are all the boxes for Tim Hill. But they're also the boxes for a right-hand reliever that is easily, I think, the most desirable, at least on paper, currently available in the free agent market. I'd love to hear your brief thoughts on him, on the potential or lack thereof, and the Mets considering someone like David Robertson on a reunion to finally be what he was supposed to be for this Mets team 2 years ago, and that was to actually be their true setup man. As we know, he was thrown right in that closer role because of Edwin Diaz going down in the WBC, and he had a lot of success with the Mets and what was a nice stint in 2023, while a lot of things elsewhere in Mets land weren't so nice. So what do you have to say on the latest, if you've heard anything with D-Rob, and if you think he's a potential fit or not?
I think he's a fit. I think he enjoyed his time with the Mets. We know he enjoyed his time with New York. He had multiple stints with the Yankees and spent a lot of years there and had success here as well 2 years ago, and they traded him to the Marlins. So, yeah, I think that definitely is a fit. I haven't heard what their level of interest has been with Robertson, but I think that I believe he is one of the options that they're considering, and he makes sense. And he has really good, the Mets didn't have a true lefty in 2023, and Robertson, who was supposed to be the setup man before Diaz got hurt, has really good splits against righties and lefties. So yeah, it makes sense. He's old, and that's that's something that to consider. He's around 40 years old, if not at that age now. So that's something that obviously could be a risk, but yeah, he's a fit definitely to bring back. And keep in mind, I mean, David Stearns wasn't here yet the year that Billy Epler brought him in. But yeah, I think Robertson does make sense and could be a possibility as well.
Yeah, I think if the Mets bring in a guy like D-Rob, it would do wonders for their bullpen. It appears that the Chicago Cubs may be rekindling that relationship from a couple years ago when he was there in the first half of the 2022 season before he was then traded to the Phillies and helped them on their World Series run. So we'll see what happens on the D-Rob market, but I appreciate the input there. And before we let you go, Pat, we're going to get to our final comments here on the rotation front. But before I do, to everyone that's been chiming in over the past hour or so, thank you guys so much. Please smash that like and subscribe on in the live show in case you guys haven't already. Help us get to 450 likes in the live show, and our replay viewers, the same applies. And please let us know to our replay viewers, especially in the comments down below, was your biggest takeaway on everything that we discussed tonight. What Mets beat reporter there doing a fantastic job, and Pat Ragazzo. Please make sure to check out Pat with all of his respective work there. But now we have a couple comments real quick. 1200 with the $2 donation that says, nah, sign Pete with opt-outs. I definitely think that's a possibility and a reality still. Cam says Alonso opt-out 1 year. Boris says Mets pay the second year. Okay, appreciate the donation. Thank you. Steve, I appreciate the donation. I saw your text earlier. Just got to get back. Thank you. Great to see you Saturday and great to meet your awesome girlfriend. I'm so glad we got to meet. Likewise, Steve. It was an absolute blast there at Amazing Day. Pat, and I know that unfortunately you weren't able to be in attendance there at Amazing Day, but it really was cool just to have an experience where I'm hanging out in the Cadillac Club doing a live show and then come to find out that Edwin Diaz just walks in the room for people, get autographs and interact with. And then, Max Kranick walks in, so we bring him on the live show for a couple minutes. Josh Tolley walks in to come on for a couple minutes. It was truly an experience that we've never seen at Citi Field before from a fan point of view, that I want to highlight just because I think Steve and Alex did a great job on making it feel as comfortable as it did, something that you really wouldn't have seen under the previous ownership.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a new day, clearly, and I think it looked from afar. It looked like a great turnout, and all things considered, with the Alonso cloud hanging over everything, I think it went pretty well. And I definitely plan on being there next year if I can, as long as they don't schedule it on this weekend. Because I have an annual thing out of state that now I have to attend to a birthday of a family member, a new family member, a niece.
Oh, congratulations! That's
Thank
awesome.
you. Yeah, it was their first birthday this weekend. So
awesome.
Amazing Days on this weekend every year. I guess I'll never be going, but I hope that's not.
That's at least priority straight, Pat. I respect that. I'd be the same way with my kid or my niece or nephew. But okay, so getting into our final segment here, let's talk briefly on the rotation. I know that you alluded to earlier how Michael King doesn't feel like a great fit because he's a rental, but certainly highlight what you would see in the potential upside, because a lot of things stand out right away, and it is the ability to win on the big stage. It's the ability to be stretched recently from reliever to a starter, rekindling so many relationships from his time with the Yankees, with guys that are currently with the Mets, as well as guys also in the free agent market. Nick Pivetta has been absolutely screwed by the Boston Red Sox, and in hindsight, he really should have accepted the qualifying offer given the circumstances, but Pivetta is without a home right now when he's absolutely deserving of one. Jack Flaherty's without a home, even without having the qualifying offer attached to him. Could you see the Mets circling back into either of those markets, as they were reportedly connected to, going more so back to the winter meetings? I know that they actually met in hand with Nick Pivetta there at the winter meetings. So Jack Flaherty, they've at least nipped at the heels at a level of interest. Just curious to know if the Mets still have an appetite for another starter, the way that Jeff Passan a couple weeks alluded to. And outside the Roki Sasaki sweepstakes, there really hasn't been much talk of to this point.
Yeah, so I do think Michael King is a fit. I do think they should get Michael King, but I think that for a rental, he's going to be too expensive, and it's not a type of move that the Mets would make and that David Stearns would make, and I don't blame them. But I do, because if they added Michael King, then they have him and Senga as the 1 and 2, and Mania goes down to 3. You still have Montes as like a number 4, like Clay Holmes a 5, like. It just it really lengthens. You have David Peterson still too, so it probably. I know they promised Clay Holmes a starting spot in the rotation, like they did. Senga, they were going to go to a 6-man rotation if Senga stayed healthy once he came back in July last season. Maybe we could see that if they do add another starter. It's possible because Senga's used to pitching once a week in Japan. He had one really great rookie year in 2023 with the Mets and then was hurt last year, where, again, they planned on going to a 6-man rotation when Sanger came back from the IL last year. It just only lasted for one start. So, yes, I think being opportunistic on a Jack Flaherty was something that the Mets most likely are monitoring, because it makes so much sense after the year that he just had. And again, if he doesn't get the deal he wants, he deserves a long-term deal and a big deal after what he did last year. But it might not. I mean, we're creeping up on spring training already. It's almost February. Like, he doesn't have what he wants yet. And if this continues, then yeah, the Mets maybe could strike. And you mentioned King again. Yeah, they would have to give up assets, and they probably would have to give up Marte and pay off 3/4 of his salary, and give up prospects. So, and maybe even a young controllable arm. Maybe I floated speculating, of course, but like a Budo or a Tyler McGill. I don't think the Mets would want to do that when they could just strike on Jack Flaherty, which, again, like we talked about Alonso, does that affect them going after a reliever? No. Does that affect them going after a Jack Flaherty? I would say yes, if they brought back Alonso. If they don't, and even if they trade for a Torkelson, if they don't bring back Alonso, then Flaherty could become more realistic if he's still out there and if his market continues to go the way that it has and his price maybe drops. Pivetta, I'm glad you brought up, because if Alonso signs with someone else, the Mets get a compensation draft pick, because Alonso's attached to the QO. Pivetta's attached to the QO, so the Mets would give up said draft pick that they're getting from Alonso leaving. They would give to another team by signing Pivetta. So I think that those would offset each other. So that's something to keep an eye on as well if Alonso
Interesting.
leaves.
Okay, yeah, because I know the Mets like Pivetta. He's actually one of those guys that surprised me a little bit that he doesn't appear to be going back to the Red Sox, considering their pitching lab has really blossomed over the past year and a half, and he's been a part of that, both utilized as a starter and reliever. Just the start of this past year, but the year before, he was even in closer roles at times for the Red Sox. They were throwing him in every situation. He was thriving, especially that curveball is fantastic when it's at his best. I like Pivetta. I like his ability to go back in the NL East and not be the batting practice that he kind of was during his time with the Phillies, more juice baseball era when things just weren't in his favor. So we will definitely keep him in mind, especially because there have been fans that have written him off. But even as you guys see from the numbers down below, if you're watching the live stream at the moment, a 4.1 ERA this past season across 145 innings, but a 3.59 expected ERA. So certainly more favorable with the things that he can control as a pitcher there. 172 strikeouts, a 10.6 K per nine to a 2.2 walks per nine. I'm taking that K to walk ratio any and every day of the week, and I know the Mets certainly would too. Same applies with Jack Flaherty, and Jack just feels like a greater likelihood because of the fact they're giving up no comp for him. And the fact that he's still been out there, I think, is notable, not only on his questionable health over the past couple of years, as well as his demands of seeking something probably beyond what he's being offered right now in the range of 1 to 3 year deals. But similar to Alonso, and maybe to a lesser degree than a guy like Alex Bregman, but these Scott Boras clients, especially, they really find themselves in the same category where it's hard to envision them getting anything else than what the market is currently presenting them.
Yeah, I think the Mets should add at the front of the rotation and not at the back if they want to be serious about taking the Dodgers in the playoff series. They should be looking at Flaherty. If it's 1 to 3 years, I think that's perfect for the Mets, no matter what the money is, especially if Alonso leaves. So I think that's something that maybe could heat up in the next couple of weeks as we see if Alonso's market resolves by then.
Yeah, I'm hoping that we finally get something on the Alonso front, because as much as I enjoy covering the Mets and going through the new headlines every single day, there's something about talking about the same player on a daily basis for like a month and a half, 2 months straight that I can stomach with Juan Soto, but I can't stomach with Pete Alonso. I think it's for similar reason as Steve Cohen, because he's fed up with these really tired, exhausting negotiations for a player that, let's be frank, maybe isn't warranted of having such exhausting negotiations for, to the degree that the Mets had with a guy like Juan Soto, for example. But that is what I leave you with, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. We really appreciate your patience with the live show. Pat, thank you so much for taking the time. Of course, we were a lot longer than we were supposed to be, but I really appreciate you coming on for the first time in a hot minute, and you've been killing it with your coverage lately, so thank you so much. Keep up the great work on your end, and before we let you go, please let everyone know where they can find you.
Well, thanks, Wardy. I appreciate it. Always enjoy coming on. There's obviously a lot to talk about, so it's hard to stay within any type of time limit. So that's totally okay. But yeah, you check out my work at Ragazzo Report on Twitter and Instagram. You can check out my work at Mets on SI and Yankees on SI. I guess more so emphasize Mets on SI since this is a Mets stream. Si.com/MLB/Mets. That's where you can find all of my articles daily.
Final question, Pat, and then we're both going to get off air now. Everyone wants to know, would the Mets consider someone like Ryan Mountcastle, in your humble opinion, if they weren't going to pivot to someone like Spencer Torkelson?
I can fine. We're on the live stream now. I haven't really explored it, but at least from a rumor standpoint, Ryan Mountcastle, I think he's a fit, especially if they don't get Torkelson, and he is a name that I've heard floated, but nothing too concrete there at the moment. But that is maybe a name to keep an eye on as well.
Okay, so I'm expecting to break down an article from yours in the next 24 to 48 hours further on Ryan Mountcastle, the Mets being seriously in heavy talks on the trade front. All jokes aside, though, Pat, thank you again so much for coming on. We appreciate it greatly. That is Pat Ragazzo, everybody. This is your guy, WardyNYM. We thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for more consistent coverage here on the platform covering all things Mets. Until then, have a fantastic